Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 114 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Please only use a black-approved earpiece. Keep your earpiece away from microphones at all times. When you are not using the earpiece, place it face down on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Now, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members as well. Before speaking, please do wait until I recognize you by name. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. You have the choice of either Floor, English, or French. And if interpretation is lost, please do inform me and the clerk immediately. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 16th, 2023, the committee will now resume its study of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the current situation in Iran. I'd now like to welcome our two witnesses here in person. We have Dr. Farzin Nadimi, who's a senior fellow with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And joining us virtually, we have Mr. Kasra Arabi, who is the director of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Research Group. Thank you both for having joined us. You will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to questions from the members. However, I would ask that you do look over to the screen and the monitor every once in a while, because if this is going up, that means you should really be wrapping up your comments or your response to members to questions posed by members within 10 to 15 seconds. That having been explained, we will go to Dr. Nadimi. Dr. Nadimi, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
For over 4 decades, the Islamic regime in Iran has founded and aggressively supported terrorism and terrorist organizations in the Middle East and defied international norms by conducting destabilizing activities with global repercussions. The roots of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, go back to the 1979 anti-status quo revolution in Iran, when a number of paramilitary terrorist groups merged to assume the role of an enforcer of the new regime. They targeted activists, rival political factions, and ethnic and religious minorities in line with the regime's monopolism and suppressive behavior. This role, protecting the revolution and its achievements, has inked into the new Iranian constitution's Article 150. In fact, according to the second charter of the IRGC, published in 1982, the Revolutionary Guard's main agenda is not only to safeguard the Islamic Revolution and its achievements, but also to continuously work toward realizing the God's will and expanding the rule of God as interpreted by the Supreme Revolutionary Leader and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. So, the IRGC is one of the very few military forces in the world, perhaps the only one, that claims a direct connection with the Almighty through its chain of command. Throughout the 1980s and the Iran-Iraq War, the IRGC grew its arms into separate ground forces, Navy and Air Forces, Basij, and the Quds Force, the expeditionary branch of the IRGC. Quds Force has repeatedly been targeted with sanctions for its active role in supporting and leading terrorist organizations in recent years. But Quds Force is only one part of the whole. It is often boosted by other branches of the IRGC and answers directly to the highest levels of the chain of command in Iran. After spending almost a decade expanding both its defensive and offensive power, in early 2000s, the IRGC shifted its attention to fighting the United States and the West in general, which were by then engaged in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also to defeat its self-declared enemy, namely the State of Israel. by following one of the basic principles of warfare, the economy of force, which means judicious employment and distribution of forces. Iran created and managed a network of proxy militant groups to do most of the fighting and dying for it. Iran has also increasingly relied on criminal gangs in target countries to target Iranian dissidents and journalists. The IRGC also has a powerful intelligence arm, the intelligence organization with extraordinary powers, undeclared prisons, and notorious reputation for locking up and torturing and raping political opponents. The IRGC's intelligence organization has a foreign operations branch, and it's especially involved in targeting foreign and Iranian citizens in countries like Turkey, and as a result has designated last year by the US Treasury. The IRGC is by design an anti-status quo ideological international force that seeks to alter regional and also international balance of power. Its extraterritorial role makes IRGC one of the main tools of the regime's state-sponsored terrorism beside the intelligence ministry. State-sponsored or directed terrorism is generally defined as government support or control of acts of international terrorism, usually by violent non-state actors with funding, training, hosting, directing, and supplying weapons to them. Those definitions rarely include a state that commits act of terrorism all by itself in a systematic manner. The IRGC does have such a quality in the form of its Quds Force, the same extraterritorial arm. Therefore, international terrorism is not a problem isolated to non-state actors or certain regions. It is a global problem. So is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, or the IRGC. The IRGC has also quickly went to work to export the revolution by supporting guerrilla movements around the world. Also, when the devastating Iran-Iraq war ended in 1988, with the IRGC, by the way, playing a very key role in prolonging it. The IRGC expanded exponentially, both as a conventional military organization, but also as a force to safeguard Islam and export the revolution. The US Department of State has designated and sanctioned 4 countries, Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and Syria, as countries that have repeatedly provided support for acts of international terrorism pursuant to 3 specific laws. Under Iran, in April 2019, the State Department designated IRGC as instrumental in founding, training, and supplying Hezbollah, a group designated a foreign terrorist organization by the State Department and also by the Canadian government in 2002. While the Canadian government mainly sees the threat of terrorism originating from the 3 main components: violent Sunni Islamist extremism, both at home and abroad, international terrorist groups, and domestic issue-based extremism, it also admits to the changing nature of the terrorist threat facing Canada. It is now time to broaden this definition and clearly include state terrorism conducted directly by its main element of power. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Arabi. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Honourable members, I testify before you today at a time when the threat from Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps jihadi terrorism has reached unprecedented levels in the West. In the past 72 hours, we at United Against Nuclear Iran have identified an individual at a rally in Toronto dressed in IRGC attire, threatening IRGC-inspired jihadi violence on Canada's streets. Despite the rising threat of IRGC terror, there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the IRGC, its violent Islamist extremist activities on Western soil, and how prescribing the IRGC will practically mitigate its ability to operate abroad, including in Canada. The IRGC is not a conventional armed force. It officially recognizes itself as an ideological organization with a, quote, ideological mission of jihad in God's way to spread Sharia law across the world. It operates no differently to prescribed Islamist extremist terrorist organizations, from ISIS and Al-Qaeda to Hezbollah. It has a formal program of indoctrination to radicalize all of its members and their families in a violent Islamist extremist ideology, which, as my research has revealed, calls on its members to wage armed jihad against Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians on the basis that they, quote, have unacceptable faith and must either convert to Islam or be killed. It also teaches its recruits that Iranians who oppose the Islamic regime in Iran are muharebs, are waging war against God, and must not just be killed, but must be tortured prior to their death. In a bid to make the IRGC a more ideologically pure and extremist force, Ayatollah Khamenei has increased indoctrination in the IRGC, which now makes up for more than 50% of its training. It has also restricted its conscript intake to members of the Basij paramilitary force and has doubled down on the most extremist, Islamist and anti-Semitic doctrine, namely the apocalyptic and militaristic doctrine of Mahdiism, which calls for the destruction of the State of Israel and the killing of Jews worldwide to facilitate the return of the so-called Messianic hidden Imam. These are not just empty actions. Look at the modus operandi of the IRGC: terrorism, hostage-taking, hijackings. In the past few years, the IRGC has increased its terrorist activities on Western soil. In 2022 alone, UK authorities announced that they had foiled more than 16 IRGC terrorist attacks on British soil. But the IRGC is not only conducting acts of terror, direct acts of terror in the West, it is also seeking to nurture homegrown Islamist radicalization and terrorism using tactics identical to that of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We, at United Against Nuclear Iran, recently obtained and exposed videos of 8 IRGC commanders being hosted online by a London-based entity called the Islamic Students Association of Britain and Europe. In their online speeches, these commanders glorified IRGC terrorism, propagated extreme anti-Semitism, and even called on British Muslim students to join their, quote, apocalyptic army that will eradicate the lives of Jews everywhere in the world. This student body also has branches in Canada. Indeed, in 2023, an IRGC-affiliated propaganda anthem, Salute Commander, designed to radicalize children, was recorded on Canadian soil. These methods are identical to homegrown Islamist radicalization tactics used by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But unlike ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which are proscribed terrorist organizations, the current sanctions regime on the IRGC does not prohibit its propaganda activities, nor does it prohibit its ability to disseminate jihadi propaganda. Prescribing the IRGC would fundamentally change this. Prescription would give the Canadian government a clear mandate to prohibit any activity, including propaganda activity, related to the IRGC. It would also provide Canada's local communities, including teachers, local police force, with the necessary safeguarding tools to identify and prevent against IRGC or Shia radicalization. At present, Canada's preventative program, designed to identify and prevent individuals becoming involved with terrorism through radicalization, is almost exclusively focused on Sunni Islamist extremism, meaning that IRGC and Shia Islamist extremist activities are blind spots. Prescribing the IRGC would fundamentally change this and equip Canada's communities with the ability to identify and prevent Shia and IRGC radicalization. In other words, the claim that prescribing the IRGC is just a symbolic move is entirely false. Prescribing the IRGC will have practical and meaningful consequences on the IRGC's ability to conduct its radicalization and terrorism activities on Canadian soil. This is a step the Canadian government must immediately consider. I speak as both an expert on the subject matter, but also as someone whose best friend, British-Iranian journalist Priya Zarati, was stabbed in London only a few months ago in an IRGC terror attack. The continued failure to prescribe the IRGC is putting Canadian lives at risk and poses a major national security threat to Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now open it up to questions from the members. And first up is MP Epp. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of the witnesses for your testimony. I'll start with you, Mr. Nadimi. You referenced the IRGC's judicial use of force. And so they're acting with proxies, are acting in concert with other, the Houthis, the Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. So how much would actually those groups that some of which we've already listed as terrorist entities, how much would we diminish them by simply going after IRGC? I mean, what is the level of coordination through, it's been coined the axis of resistance?
Well, the axis of resistance, even if at some levels there is a loose connection, more coordination, given the existing technologies to communicate. But at the same time, Iran has been investing for years to arm these groups and to train them, to encourage them, and to together to plan for situations exactly like the Houthis have been involved in since last November. So even if there is not a day-to-day operational planning involving both Iranians and Houthis, for example, or Hamas fighters, these kinds of planning have been done for years, and that includes October 7 operations, that the horrendous terrorist action by the Houthis, by the Hamas on October 7th. Even if Iran was not directly involved in that particular day and that particular operation, for years Iran has sponsored Hamas and has helped them arm and train for this exact reason.
You have a comment on this as well?
Sorry, did you say, do I have a comment?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there is. Well, the IRGC has manufactured various proxy groups in the Middle East, and there is a significant level of coordination, particularly with those IRGC manufactured groups. These are groups that the Revolutionary Guard has created from scratch and has spent a significant amount of capital, not only training, arming and funding their fighters, but also radicalizing their recruits in the same ideology as the Revolutionary Guard. In relation to the Houthis, we at United Against Nuclear Iran identified the Behzad intelligence ship, which is an intelligence ship that the IRGC owns and operates, and has directly been providing intelligence to the Houthis to conduct attacks, terror attacks against commercial shipping, as well as US and its allies' ships in the Persian Gulf. The level of coordination is there, and even if you monitor in the months and actually the years leading up to the October 7th terrorist attacks, we see that the changes to the IRGC's personnel, changes to the IRGC's doctrines, and broader military security infrastructure of the regime in Iran indicated that the IRGC was preparing for a major confrontation with Israel. So all the IRGC...
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just so short of time. Now let's bring this to our shores. Allegations of 700 militants acting in concert with the IRGC here on Canadian soil. Allegations that the IRGC is working with Hells Angels here and in the U.S. Can you comment on their level of integration, their level of control, their level of activity right here on our Canadian soils?
Yeah, the IRGC has three ways of operating when it comes to terrorism. The first is direct terrorist attacks, when it sends its operatives to conduct these operations. There is a strong track record for this. As well as this, it uses armed gangs, which it has been using increasingly more so than before. As well as that, it also uses the same methods as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, whereby it has nurtured a social constituency in Canada, in the US, in the United Kingdom, and has used the same methods as ISIS Al-Qaeda to radicalize them using the networks affiliated with the regime in Iran, from religious centers to mosques to community centers to schools, as a means to radicalize local Canadian nationals, local British nationals, radicalize them and recruit them for operations. Homegrown Islamist extremism is an increasing threat that the IRGC poses. And the current sanctions regime does not prohibit against that.
Okay, and so practically speaking, if we list them, as we should, as a terrorist entity, practically, how will that diminish their activities in Canada?
Absolutely. Practically speaking, as I explained in my testimony, the current sanctions regime does not prohibit the IRGC's ability to disseminate its propaganda or disseminate its jihadi propaganda activities. Soft power activities under the current sanctions regime are not covered. Unlike ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which are prescribed terrorist organizations, prescribing the IRGC would give the Canadian government a full mandate to prohibit any activity, including propaganda and soft activity, related to the IRGC. As well as this, it would equip Canadian local communities, the local police force, the local schools, with the necessary tools to identify and prevent against Shia and IRGC radicalization. Again, the current preventative program in Canada, like Britain, like the European Union, is exclusively focused on Salafi jihadism, Sunni Islamist extremism. Prescribing the IRGC would fundamentally change that. and, as I said, would equip Canadian local communities with the ability to identify and prevent against Shia and IRGC radicalization. Previously, in my testimony, I mentioned that we at United Against Nuclear Iran, in the past 72 hours, identified an individual, a Canadian individual, at a rally in Toronto, dressed in IRGC attire and threatening IRGC-inspired violence on Canada's streets. So this is ongoing. It's a major problem, and the current sanctions regime does not prohibit it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to MP Oliphant. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both our witnesses. Without casting any doubts on anything you're saying, I'd like to understand how you gather both your intelligence and your evidence. Strong statements being made on exactly what's happening. I feel like I'm speaking to intelligence officers or people who are engaged in that activity. For both of you, I'm just wondering, how do you get your information? How is it verified by double source? How is it? How do you get it?
I'm born in Iran. I've lived in Iran and studied and worked in Iran. And I did my military service in Iran until 2005, when I moved to Britain to study. I did a master's degree in war studies. I did a PhD degree in Middle Eastern studies at the University of Manchester and King's College London. And then I moved to Canada for a year. I was a visiting fellow at the University of York. Then
I'm not questioning your qualifications. I'm just understanding your research, current research, and your intelligence sources and how it's verified.
Well, I do not have access to classified intelligence, but as a senior fellow of the Washington Institute for Nearest Policy, we constantly talk with intelligence and people from intelligence community, and also from the administration, and other Iranian and who have primary knowledge of the IRGC's operations. And from an analytical point, many of these contents of this statement that I made was analytical, based on information that is readily available.
Go to Mr. Arabi now with the same question.
Yes, like Farzin, I'm an Iranian. I've been looking at and studying the IRGC for more than a decade. And through my expertise and time as working on the IRGC, I've developed a network of contacts inside of Iran, as well as being able to identify locations on the online space where the IRGC is active and has provided open source information. Through such means, both through networks on the ground, as well as knowing where to look, I've been able to maintain a constant flow of primary information, primary data, primary FAAE material, primary IRGC material, and as a means through which I have been able to assess this primary IRGC material and therefore publish on the subject. For example, I have obtained the internal training manuals the IRGC has used to radicalize its recruits, as I referenced in my testimony. And I've always ensured that my analysis is centered on primary material, primary FAAE material, primary FAAE material, specifically in relation to the IRGC.
I want to move on a little bit more. I'm a Canadian, but I don't have access to Canadian intelligence, so I'm just trying to figure that out. I want to follow up on Mr. Epps' I think, very good line of questioning with respect to the so-called axis of resistance. You didn't talk about money. Is there money that flows from the IRGC? Do you track it? Do you understand the relationship, the financial or resource relationship between the IRGC and or the Quds Force and Hezbollah and Hamas or the Houthis or any other groups? Is there information about how that happens? Mr. Nadimi first.
A lot of that information is in the open source, and yes, Iran and RGC funds Quds Force operations, because Quds Force is a branch of the IRGC, and Quds Force.
But from Quds Force to the proxies, is there I don't imagine they publish their bank account, their financial statement. So
Well, according to the statements made by the Iranian officials themselves and many of those proxy groups leaders, like Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, when they visit Iran, they usually carry suitcases full of cash. And when Qasem Soleimani, before he was killed by U.S. Military operation in Iraq, visited those countries, or Syria mostly, they carried cash, and there were regular flights, cargo flights from Iran to those countries, and those flights also transported cash and gold.
that's illegal activity, though, regardless of what.
I'm afraid you're out of time,
Of course,
MP Oliphant.
they were.
Because those groups are sponsor our state, our terrorist organization. So if we have proof of that, it should be reported.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go to MP Bergeron. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being with us today. And thank you for enlightening us with your comments, as well as your experience and your studies. I'd say that to date, there seems to be some consensus from the witnesses about the idea of listing the IRGC in the list of terrorist entities in Canada. Last week, we heard a rather iconoclastic testimony from Professor Raboudi from the University of Ottawa, who said that while recognizing that, on the one hand, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps is likely engaging in terrorist activities, and despite the fact that they would have to be ultimately included in the list, in Canada's list of terrorist entities, he was saying that the time is not ripe now, that there would be a circumstantial issue, which would mean that now is not the time to do this, because in the context of the current war in the Middle East, this would affect the credibility of Canada in the global south. What do you think of that? I address my question to both witnesses. Perhaps, Mr. Nadimi, you could begin.
Sir, I think it's a responsibility of all the free world and Western nations to tackle this problem, because the IRGC is a growing problem. They are an adaptive complex system. They adapt to existing situations, and we have to design and plan for measures against them accordingly. With any days that when any days of inaction in IRGC's growing operations and growing abilities, both conventional weapons and also their terrorist operations, I think we will be a loss for the free world, because they will be more capable, and they will expand their activities in the region and beyond. Yesterday, there was this report that the Houthis have established a working relationship with the Al-Shabaab group in Somalia. Al-Shabaab group is a Sunni terrorist Al-Qaeda affiliated group. Houthis are a Zaydi Shiite affiliated with Iran, and now mostly with this consent of the Iranian sponsors of Houthis, they are establishing a relationship so the Houthis can provide Al-Shabaab with more sophisticated, longer range, more lethal weapons. Probably if for the time that in the future, if Houthis stand down, Al-Shabaab in Somalia can take over their job.
Donc, si je comprends bien, selon...
So if I understood you correctly, in your opinion, the argument saying that now is not the right time should not be a consideration in Canada's decision-making?
I think it is the right time. That probably it's even too late or not too late, but late for making such decisions. I think it's about time for Canada to designate RIGC in line with other countries like United States, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the European Parliament declares RIGC as a terrorist organization.
Monsieur Arabi, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Mr. Arabi, what do you think?
This is absolutely the right time. When we're talking about prescription, first and foremost, this is about Canada's national security. This is an interior ministry issue. There is a serious threat of IRGC terrorism and IRGC homegrown radicalization, homegrown extremism, homegrown terrorism in Canada. The current sanctions regime on the IRGC does not prohibit its ability to disseminate jihadi propaganda, nor does it prohibit its ability to carry out soft power activities, which we know they are doing in Canada, which we know they have cultivated a social constituency in Canada. Just in this past 72 hours, we've had a Canadian individual dressed in IRGC attire making IRGC-inspired violent gestures at other Canadians in Toronto. So first and foremost, beyond the foreign policy aspect of this, prescription relates to the national security of Canada and the protection of Canadian civilians. It is absolutely fundamental that Canada prescribes the IRGC to protect against the threat of IRGC terrorism on Canadian soil. That is the most pressing issue here. This isn't, when we're talking about prescription, it is primarily an interior ministry issue. It's about national security. And the current sanctions regime on the IRGC in Canada does not protect against IRGC terrorism on Canadian soil. So it is absolutely essential to do this sooner rather than later.
Now go to MP McPherson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And this is an important study. I'm very grateful for the witnesses for being here today. Before I ask some questions, I just have to do a little bit of housekeeping. I need to move a motion and read it into the record, not for voting on or dealing with right now, but I do want to just get it on the record. The notice of motion, and we will share it with the members shortly. That, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee conduct a study on Canada-India relations, with particular focus on human rights of minorities in India and Canada's arms sales to India. That the study consist of at least 4 meetings, that the Minister of Foreign Affairs be invited to appear, and that the committee invite witnesses from Canadian civil society and international human rights organizations. That the committee reports its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report. Thank you, and we'll send that out to the members in both official languages. Thank you very much, Dr. Nadini, for being here today and for sharing your thoughts with us. One of the things that I brought this motion forward to do and to have this study was to understand the implications of listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization. You've made it clear that you think that it is, if not now, too late or getting late. We should have done this much sooner. And we had testimony from somebody earlier this week that talked about the fact that Canada wasn't using the tools that we already had effectively. So my concern is this doing one more thing badly when we are already not using the sanction regime adequately? We are already not enforcing, using the tools that we have at our disposal. What is your sense on how effective it would be if we don't have that enforcement mechanism in place?
Thank you very much for having me and inviting me to this important session. I think that robust legislation has always been very effective, even if there are existing measures. The very reason that the problem still persists means that there is still room for robust legislation. With regard to the IRGC, and existing power in Canada, yes, probably the RCMP already has special powers, but I think with more resources, they can do much better, and especially with better intelligence, they can foresee activities that these actors might have in mind on the Canadians.
Thank you. Well, and the sanction regime is something I've been concerned with for a long time because it is becoming a larger piece of our foreign policy, but yet we have not invested in the enforcement of those sanctions or to make sure that those sanctions are being taken seriously. And I do wonder, from your perspective, the sanctions that we already have in place, have they had a demonstrable effect on Iran? Has Iran found ways to sidestep those? Has there been any impact to date?
Well, Iran and the Islamic regime in Iran has always been, in many cases, has been able to circumvent sanctions, adopt to existing sanctions, create measures to bypass some of the sanctions. But the very existence of sanctions and sanctions regimes, I think, has a very important psychological effect foremost. And also, with regard to IRGC, I think it will have a very positive effect on the Iranian people also, that have been subjected to IRGC's nefarious activities for decades. With regard to Canada, I think yes, it is very important that the government is also committed to any legislation that covers this issue, but there are rooms for implementing and adapting, and I think the Iranian community in the Iranian Canadian community, for example, in Ontario and Toronto, knows how much this can cut into with regard to activities and the influence that IRGC and Shiite fundamentalism has especially on Iranian Canadian communities.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Now we go to the second round, and first off is Abi Abul Taif. You get 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the witnesses, and welcome on board. Mr. Arabi, would you be able to tell us who's the partners of IRGC in Canada? If you'd be able to name organizations, would be great.
There are several entities. One of the most concerning entities is the presence of the Islamic Students Association of Canada. This entity, as I mentioned, is directly part of the Office of the Supreme Leader, Office of the Supreme Leader Beta Ahbari structure, and has had direct contact with IRGC commanders in the UK branch of the Islamic Students Association, hosted 8 IRGC commanders, whereby these IRGC commanders propagated and glorified IRGC terrorism. They propagated extreme anti-Semitism, and they even called on British Muslim students and European Muslim students to join their apocalyptic army that will, quote, end the lives of Jews everywhere in the world. Now, this association has a branch in Canada. We have also seen there are entities in Canada that have been propagating IRGC-affiliated propaganda anthems. As I said, Salute Commander. Salute Commander was a propaganda anthem that was created in Iran by the IRGC.
Beyond propaganda, to Mr. Nadimi, can you name organizations that are doing money laundering, doing drugs, doing weapons, feeding outflowing money to IRGC and to the Iranian regime? Can you name organizations, please, Mr. Nadimi? Yes, of course. Yes.
No, I cannot. But the money exchanges in Toronto.
So we don't have any idea how large the network in Canada.
I cannot comment on that. But as I mentioned, the money exchanges in Toronto have means to directly exchange money with Iran, and that can easily be exploited by the IRGC and any Iranian government members.
So to combat this organization in Canada, it seems like across the world, but we need to worry about Canada the most. You think we are serious about doing this, and do we understand totally how big and how serious our enemy, in order to be able to find the proper resources to fight it?
I cannot comment on that.
You do understand the mindset of IRGC since you were born in Iran, and that's probably a beginning to understand how big the challenge is.
Of course, the IRGC by design is an international organization. They export the revolution, and that still persists. That the ideology of exporting the revolution, expanding the rule of the Vilayat FAAE throughout the world, is and creating this Islamic civilization, the ideal Islamic civilization by the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei is not just as a theory. The IRGC has been assigned by the Supreme Leader, and that's official, to implement his ideas and his doctrine. So influence the IRGC has been trying to establish in Canada because of the large Iranian-Canadian community.
Do you think they are deep-rooted within the community itself and the communities that they can speak to well, or even beyond that community they might have branched out to have that fundamental challenge, to bring that fundamental challenge in Canada on the security and economy and other situations?
For and foremost, the focus of IRGC in Canada is on the Iranian-Canadian community foremost, and also the dissidents, the Iranian dissidents that live in Canada, and also any organization or NGOs organization that has any kind of focus on the plight of the Iranian
But they are
people.
also the threat to the to the overall Canadian society beyond the community, aren't they?
Yes, because the Iranian-Canadian community is an integral part of the Canadian
What's the
society.
consequences of fighting them versus just staying quiet on dealing with them?
Mentioned, the IRGC is an adaptive, complex system. They adapt to new conditions and situations, and they have shown the ability to increase their role, to increase their presence, and that has been the case in Canada and in many other countries that do have an Iranian diaspora.
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take the next segment. If I could start off with Mr. Arabi. First of all, I should say the interpreters are advising that your volume is very high. If you could kindly turn it down a bit before you respond to this question. My question was, you touched on an incident in the UK, a terrorist attack, that was orchestrated by the IRGC. Given that most members here aren't familiar, could you give us more examples, whether it be in the UK or more broadly throughout Europe? That's the first question. And the second one is, if you could perhaps advise us as to why the government, the British government, never chose to prescribe the IRGC. If you could turn up the volume, my apologies. I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yes, I was muted. Apologies. The two main targets of IRGC terrorism across the world are the Iranian diaspora community and the Jewish community. The IRGC is the most anti-Semitic organization in the world, and a big part of its focus is targeting the Jewish community abroad. In the UK, the IRGC's carried out surveillance identifying Jewish targets, has created a hit list for Jewish community members. Similarly, in Germany, they have done the same. They have targeted also Jewish synagogues, Jewish kindergartens, as well as targeting Iranian diaspora members. They have been pushing and trying to mainstream anti-Semitism across Europe, across North America, and as well as directly conducting these terror plots and terror attacks. Unfortunately, the majority, fortunately, have been foiled by British security authorities. They have also, as I have said, have been nurturing homegrown radicalization. I think this really goes to the point. The current sanctions regime on the IRGC does not prohibit its radicalization activities. So it's using the same methods as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but unlike ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which are prescribed terrorist organizations, the current sanctions regime does not prohibit the IRGC's ability to nurture homegrown radicalization, and it is specifically targeting not the Iranian diaspora community, because the overwhelming majority of Iranians who live abroad oppose the Islamic Republic, oppose the IRGC, but they are targeting the Shia community abroad. So that's a sizable community. They are targeting Shias, for example, in Britain, the British Shia Iraqis, British Shia Lebanese, British Shia Afghanistanis, British Shia Pakistanis. So they have built
I'm so sorry, I have limited time. So if you could also kindly explain to us why the British government has yet to prescribe the IRGC.
I think it's an abject failure in British policy, and I think that the opposition has already pledged that it will prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organisation as a priority. There was in Britain a visible disagreement between the Home Office and the Foreign Office, and the Home Office was in favour of prescribing the IRGC, rightly so, because first and foremost, the prescription of the IRGC is an interior ministry issue. It is about British national security, the protection of British citizens. Unfortunately, the Foreign Office opposed the move and was able to block it. However, there is hope. At least the opposition party, which is predicted to win the election. Of course, we can't predict elections, but the polling shows that they have pledged that they will prescribe the IRGC as an immediate foreign policy priority and domestic security issue.
For that, now if I could go to Dr. Nadimi. Mr. Arabi did explain some of the practical consequences that will follow should the IRGC be prescribed in Canada. Could you elaborate on that as well? In your opinion, what would the consequences be?
The IRGC has a naval branch, the IRGC Navy, which operates small missile boats and a large number of them, and also has recently commissioned missile corvettes. They have the control of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and the shipping lanes to and from the strategic water lane. I think one possible repercussion could be targeting of Canadian flag or Canadian affiliated ships that use the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf of Oman by measures such as seizures and other intrusive activities. Even it can be more serious actions could be considered.
Thank you very much for that. Now we go to MP Bergeron. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. In an article published in the Washington Institute dealing with the increased tensions in the Middle East, you explained, as referring to the Iranian people, it's essential to note that the Iranian regime's acts do not reflect the wishes of their population, most of whom want peaceful coexistence with other countries in the region. My very simple question is this: how far does the regime's propaganda for example, about the State of Israel, to what extent does this propaganda is well received? Is it well received by the Iranian population? And based on the context that you have in the country, how have the people reacted to the attack by Iran against Israel?
The Iranian regime does have some support base. There are differences on the percentage. Some people count as many as 9 to 10% of support base among the Iranian people. But in general, I can sum up the reaction of the Iranian people, especially those that oppose the regime, as indifference. However, those that do support the regime, of course, they're very in very celebratory mood, because after over 40 years of self-declared war against Israel, finally the regime had a chance to launch missiles and drones and cruise missiles from the Iranian territory against Israel. Israeli proper, and that was considered a major achievement, given the fact that ultimately Israeli response was very measured. So those who supported the regime were very happy about it, and obviously the majority of Iranian people who do not support the regime were indifferent, or in many cases, on social media, they went on social media to offer support to the Israelis.
Thank you. We next go to MP McPherson. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in knowing about the impact that your research has had on both of you, actually. Could you tell me whether researchers like you have whether you feel that you're at risk because of your work, in the same way that we've seen that other critics of the IRGC have been put at risk? Perhaps I'd start with you, Dr. Nadimi.
Well, obviously, any analyst of Iranian heritage has been subjected to some social media activities by the supporters of the regime, and I was no exception to that. I have not been able to go to Iran since 2014, the last time that I visited Iran, and I have been aware of obviously the risks, but yes, there are risks, especially for the journalists who cover Iran, especially those networks the Persian language networks based in Europe and in the United States. They have been subjected to harassment by the Iranian regimes, but with regard to analysts, that differs.
Dr. Arabi or Mr. Arabi?
The short answer is yes, and without going into too much detail due to the sensitivity, I've had in-person, for example, surveillance conducted, regular recipient of death threats, have had regular cyber and malware hacking attempts directed from the regime in Iran and the IRGC. Again, it's just, I'm one of many, certainly not the exception, and the threat is increasing against Iranian diaspora members who are outspoken against the regime, who conduct research, particularly on the security, military, intelligence apparatus. And unfortunately, Iranian diaspora members no longer feel safe in the West. And that is the sad reality. And I think that reflects the abject failure in Western policy to take action against the regime in Iran, choosing instead to negotiate with it, which has really set a precedent. The regime in Iran believes that it can carry out attacks, it can intimidate, and can conduct these acts of terror without facing any consequences. And that really goes to the root of the problem. Until the regime in Iran believes that it can get away with this, my sad prediction is that this will only increase. Given the sizable Iranian diaspora community in Canada, I believe this is a major threat, and prescription can help mitigate against it.
Thank you very much. That concludes our questions. At this point, on behalf of all the members, I just want to thank you, Dr. Nadimi and Mr. Arabi. Very, very grateful for your expertise and for your time. So I will suspend for a couple of minutes so we can ensure that our next slate of witnesses can make it to the table.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone. We will resume our study on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the current situation in Iran. At this point, wanted to acknowledge that we're very, very grateful to have two distinguished witnesses with us today. We have Professor Fen Osler-Habson, who is the Chancellor Professor at the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. And also we have Mr. Dennis Horak, who is a retired Canadian diplomat and ambassador with very deep insights on the region. Regrettably, I should inform the members that we were also slated to hear from Brandon Silver from the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, but he had some headphone challenges. So, just to explain to our witnesses, you will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to questions from the members. Yes, Mr. Bergeron.
Je ne veux surtout
I do not want to call into question the decision made regarding Mr. Silver, but I thought I heard during communication between him and the clerk that he had a headset which at some point in time had been certified by the House and that is no longer certified?
As explained to me, that particular headset is not currently approved. I suspect it was approved. It was a Senate headset. My apologies. So I guess we're using different headsets.
It's not on the list.
Yeah.
ma question.
So my more general question, I think we've already had this conversation with Madame Châtel. Wouldn't it have been possible to do a sound test with our interpreters, with those headsets, to see whether that headset worked rather than simply sending the witness back home, whereas he had taken the trouble to log in?
No, the guidelines as they currently stand, Mr. Bergeron, are that you are not permitted to use headphones that haven't been approved as they currently stand.
Même si le son est parfait.
Previously,
Even if the sound is perfect?
yes. Sorry, those are just those.
Monsieur Silver, éventuellement.
Will we have another opportunity to hear Mr. Silver?
But I should also underscore that the clerk had sent him and mailed him headphones, but for some reason. So I don't believe we'll have another chance to devote to this study. But he has undertaken to send us his written submissions. Okay. So that having been explained, we will go to Professor Habson. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I understand the committee is focusing on three issues: whether the federal government should list the IRGC as a terrorist entity, the connection between people or assets in Canada and the IRGC, and paths forward to support Iranian human rights activists and other political refugees. Let me comment specifically on these three issues. I won't go through the litany of all the things that the IRGC has been up to. You've heard that in the hearings. I don't need to add to that litany. But as we all know, the federal government has referred to the IRGC as a terrorist organization, called its leaders terrorists, taken measures to prevent its leadership from entering Canada, and designated the Quds Force as a terrorist entity. The House of Commons has passed non-binding motions to designate the IRGC as a terrorist entity. So why not take the final step to actually list it as a terrorist entity? As I understand it, there are three, perhaps four major concerns. A terrorist designation might affect low-level individuals who are forced to serve in the IRGC as part of their mandatory military service. Secondly, such a designation would be resource-intensive and place enormous demands on our security and intelligence services. Third, under Canada's criminal code, a terrorist entity is defined as a person, group, trust, partnership, or fund, or an unincorporated association or organization. Does the IRGC technically meet the legal test? Some would say no, because it's a state actor, not a non-state actor. And fourth, such a designation would prevent a potential resumption of diplomatic relations with Iran. And that is perhaps one of the reasons, Mr. President, why the United Kingdom has not designated the IRGC as a terrorist entity, a question you put to one of the previous panelists. So let me go to the first concern. I draw your attention to a recent publication by the Atlantic Council, which points out that since 2010, 80% of the IRGC conscripts actively chose to join the IRGC. There are further reports that many of those conscripts were already members of the Basij Resistance Force, which is a volunteer paramilitary organization. Some 20% of the membership do come from unprivileged and poor areas, and they have probably been forcibly conscripted into the IRGC. Concerns about sanctioning individuals who have been coerced to join the organization and subject to its indoctrination programs must be weighed against the broader risk of allowing members of the IRGC to enter Canada who may be involved in various kinds of illicit activities that support the organization and Iranian interests. And again, that litany is a long one. Money laundering, illegal business activities, spying on Iranian exiles, issuing death threats, and so forth. Globally, those risks are growing. I would draw your attention to a letter sent by a group of U.S. senators to EU officials last year, where they pointed out that in July 2012, Bulgarian authorities arrested an IRGC operative suspected of planning an attack on a synagogue in Sofia. In 2016, German officials arrested IRGC-sponsored assassins. In April 2022, a detained IRGC operative was identified for conducting assassination plans in Germany and France. The second concern has to do with resource implications. That has been pointed out by a number of the witnesses here. But should that be an excuse for inaction? Should we let the proverbial underfunded bureaucratic tail wag the policy dog here? I would point out that on October 7th, 2022, the Prime Minister announced that he was going to put $76 million to strengthen Canada's capacity to implement sanctions against Iran. That's a fair bit of change in my estimation. And I think perhaps any designation of the IRGC as a terrorist organization should be accompanied by legislative requirement to report on how existing funds are being used and whether additional resources are required to support our intelligence and security services. The third concern may require a legislative fix, and there I think Bill 350, a private member's bill, might provide for a series of amendments to the Criminal Code and Immigration and Refugee Protection Act that would go one step further than the Harper government's enactment of the Justice for Victims Terrorism Act and its amendments to the State Immunity Act in 2011. The concerns about people and assets with close ties with the IRGC are well documented by our media. In the testimony I submitted to you, I've provided hyperlinks to numerous cases identifying individuals who have been involved and have ties with the IRGC. I'm not going to name them publicly here, but that evidence is, or information is readily available in public sources. By designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization, it may become easier to expel these individuals from Canada because the burden of evidence is lowered to do so, and it also will prevent IRGC individuals from entering Canada. Canada can also do more to support Iranian human rights activists, artists, journalists, and other political refugees. The World Refugee and Migration Council, of which I'm president, recently partnered with the University of Ottawa in a highly innovative program sponsored by the Open Society Foundation to support the work of human rights activists, many of them located here in Canada, who've been forced to leave their country of origin, including Iranians, for challenging injustices and who seek to continue their activism here to raise the flag on what's happening in their home country. And that's the kind of creative approach that does merit support. Thank you.
Professor Hampson, we now go to Mr. Horak. Mr. Horak, you have 5 minutes.
The Islamic Republic of Iran is a malignant and destabilizing force in the Middle East and increasingly globally. Its fingerprints are all over the current crises in the region, and it has active international networks, cyber and personal, aimed at disinformation, misinformation, intimidation, and violence. The IRGC is at the center of it all. It sits at the core of the Islamic Republic. Its tentacles have broad reach, and its political influence within Iran is unmatched. It is, in some respects, a state within a state. It is a tool of internal repression, and its members, current and former, play an essential economic role both in legitimate business circles and in sanctions-busting efforts. The Quds Force, the IRGC Quds Force, is the tip of the IRGC spear, leading Iran's pernicious efforts regionally. Its links, support, and at times direction of terrorist organizations across the region are well documented. The Quds Force is a terrorist organization by any definition of the word, and its listing by Canada in 2012 was appropriate. The question of listing the IRGC itself, however, has always been more challenging. At first glance, it may seem strange to list the Quds Force, but not the organization that controls it. It's a bit like listing the monkey, but ignoring the organ grinder. But there is some logic to it. While the Quds Force is made up of some of the most ideologically committed and nasty individuals in Iran, the IRGC is a much more complex entity. True, it has more than its fair share of ideologues, thugs, and murderers, but it is also comprised of a fair number of conscripts who see an IRGC connection as a way to get ahead in life. Listing won't change that reality. The risk of listing the IRGC is that many of these conscripts, likely including some Canadian passport holders, can get caught up in a web really meant to catch the worst of the worst. Many do their service far removed from the IRGC's violent excesses. Canada does not have the capability to differentiate the real thugs from the time servers. The IRGC is too large, its reach too expansive, and Canada is too under-resourced to be able to really enforce such a listing. The break in diplomatic relations hasn't helped. It may have freed our hand to act without fear of diplomatic repercussions, but it has also undercut our ability to know who is who both here and there. Listing the IRGC would, as a result, be a largely symbolic gesture. It wouldn't stop current, or more to the point, former IRGC members setting up in Canada or placing assets here. It happens now, and listing would be unlikely to change that in any significant way. While listing would enable Canada to act when they are discovered, and that's something, we must be realistic about what listing would and wouldn't achieve. But there is value in symbolism. It sends a message, not least to Canadians threatened by the IRGC here and human rights activists in Iran and elsewhere, that we care about and that we support them. That kind of messaging is important. It has long underpinned our human rights efforts in dealing with Iran. Many different mechanisms in addressing Iran's human rights abuses have been tried over the years. Special rapporteurs, the annual UN General Assembly resolution on human rights in Iran, controlled engagement strategies, case-by-case dialogues, sanctions, condemnations, and ultimately the break in diplomatic ties. It is fair to say that none have really managed to move the needle on human rights in Iran. Nor is there some magic bullet out there that we haven't tried that might do the trick. Advocacy on human rights doesn't work that way. It is slow, frustrating, and often without tangible rewards. It is a process. The Iranian diaspora and groups inside Iran are our allies in this effort, but we need to be careful about who we align with in our outreach efforts. Iranian diaspora communities and human rights groups are notoriously fractious. It is best for Canada to stay out of these disputes. We should be inclusive. It is for the Iranians to decide their future. But there is one exception. The National Council of Resistance of Iran, or the MEK as it is also known, is a noxious cult which, despite its odd ability to regularly attract prominent Western politicians to its annual conferences, is widely despised in Iran and should be avoided. Finally, I'll end with this observation. I spent 22 years dealing with the Middle East during my 31-year diplomatic career. 9 of those were spent focused on Iran, including 3 as head of mission in Tehran. My conclusion? With Iran, there are no easy solutions, only frustrating challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we go to MP Fast. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Fen, good to have you back at committee. Can you gentlemen help me with something? You've both identified the reasons why it may not be advisable to list the IRGC. 6 years ago, Parliament spoke. The House of Commons voted overwhelmingly to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Here we are 6 years later. Nothing has happened that I know of. The best we can do is the Prime Minister is quoted as saying that he's continuing to look for ways to responsibly list the IRGC as a terrorist organization, end quote. Mr. Hampson, Professor Hampson, is there a way of responsibly listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization under Canadian law?
Well, we did it with the Quds, and I would submit that the next step is to do it with the IRGC. It is not throwing a blanket across the entire Iranian government. Secondly, to me, the real issue is what kind of message do you want to send to the bureaucracy to mobilize itself to better coordinate its activities? It has, as I pointed out in my testimony, there has been an infusion of fairly substantial funding to deal with Iranian operatives who are working in Canada. Special division was set up in Global Affairs Canada, but it's clearly not working. And so a strong political message would provide the kind of leadership that I think is necessary to galvanize the bureaucracy to start taking this threat seriously. It would also send a strong message to our security partners, the United States being the foremost security partner, that we are serious. And the message right now is we're not that serious. So I think a resolution, more than a resolution, by the House of Commons, the Government of Canada, would provide, I think, a very important strategic focal point for getting serious about a threat that clearly is growing, as you've heard from numerous witnesses. And to me, the puzzle is, why haven't we done it up to now?
I'm puzzled as well. Mr. Horak, you identified a number of the same reasons for perhaps not listing the IRGC, but I didn't hear you say that you're fundamentally opposed to listing it. Are you opposed to listing the IRGC?
No. No, I'm not. I guess my point was, fine, we can do it. I'm just not sure that we'll be able to enforce it, that its real value would be symbolic, and that's not a small thing either. There is some value in that. There are instruments, I think, now, and I'm not a lawyer, so let me just preface that. But I think there are instruments already to deal with some of the concerns that we have, whether these are IRGC assets or not, particularly on the asset side. I mean, as far as I understand, the Justice of Victims of Terrorism Act involves confiscating, seizing, and selling off Iranian government assets. IRGC is a government entity. If they have assets here, I'm not sure why they can't be seized under the JVTA. Maybe, I don't know. But no, to your point, no, I'm not opposed to it, but I think we have to be realistic about what it'll mean. I don't think there will be much in the way of negative repercussions. We don't have diplomatic relations with them, so the sort of concerns, say, for example, that the British have about doing it, whether that would cause a break in diplomatic relations or a downgrade in diplomatic relations, we don't have to worry about that at this point.
Let me ask you this. The United States has listed the IRGC. Somehow they've been able to make it work. What is it that the United States has done that has enabled them to use this as an effective tool to at least rid their country of some of these terrorists and cells that are presumably lodged within their country?
I would venture a guess they haven't gotten rid of them. That would be my one guess. They have used this as a tool. They have used it effectively. I think they have a whole lot more resources devoted to it than we do. I think that's part of it. We are stretched pretty thin. As we all know, as we all have seen the last little while, there's a lot of concerns about the activities of various countries in Canada, and there's only so many resources to go around. And certainly devoting those to Iran is important because they are a threat to the Canadian Iranian community and to the country itself. But there are only so many resources to go around.
Is there a way of doing this responsibly, the way the Prime Minister has suggested he's seeking?
I'm not sure.
Professor Hampson.
Yeah.
Very briefly, we're over time.
Well, as I understand it, the procedure for designating, the normal procedure for designating an entity as a terrorist threat, a terrorist organization, is a bureaucratic process. And Dennis, or Mr. Horak, I should say, should be able to explain what that process is. But it does require the collaboration of the different government departments to come to that conclusion. And I think the resourcing issue, quite frankly, is a bit of a red herring for the reasons that I mentioned. I think one of the concerns, and I've heard this expressed certainly by some former officials, is that this would really prevent any effort by this government or a subsequent government to restore diplomatic relations with Iran. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. So
now we go to MP Zuberi. You have 6 minutes.
And thank you to witnesses for being here today. I appreciate your presence here and the testimony of all others. And as we said earlier in our study, if any witnesses are harassed or intimidated, they should let the committee clerk know in relation to your testimony. With respect to Mr. Horak, it's good to see you here, and I know about your work in the past, and know that you have served as a diplomat, a Canadian diplomat, for many years, including in Iran and other countries. And you spoke about the importance of clearly checking Iran. In no way, shape, or form are we giving Iran a pass with respect to all of the crimes that have been committed by Iran, the government, so many that we can enumerate and have been enumerated. You did touch upon, and as a diplomat, you did of the past, you did touch upon the importance of relations between countries. I'd like to allow you to have more time to speak about that and to note that on September of 2012, we closed our mission here of Iran to Canada. And the Iranian diplomats were not permitted to stay. And Italy since then has served as Canada's protecting power. Do you want to speak about how just about that in particular, please? Not that got there, but in terms of where that left us.
Yeah, I was in Iran up until about 4 or 5 weeks before we closed our embassy in Iran, and so we were doing all of the preparations. I had actually recommended that we close because of the circumstances that we found ourselves in, namely the Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act and the prospect of Canada seizing Iranian government properties here in Canada made the presence of a Canadian embassy in Tehran completely untenable. I made that recommendation, though, with some regret, I have to say, because I think we lost something in not being there. We lost the ability to see for ourselves what's going on the ground, to make contacts there, to be able to talk with our allies, U.S. and Israel, who aren't there, and to give them our perspectives, which we did, but also to get a sense from ourselves. Also, not to forget the kind of service that we could provide Canadians, and there are thousands of them that live in Iran. We lost all of that for the trade-off of a piece of legislation that has been, Iranian government properties have been seized, they've been sold off, judgments have been paid, but they've been paid, as I understand it, largely to American plaintiffs. So we have given up all of the positives of being there for a symbolic move which has not benefited Canadians whatsoever, nor has it deterred Iran from sponsoring terrorism. We've lost that ability to see what's going on, to be able to talk to them. And these are important things. Diplomatic relations, and I get frustrated when people see these as an instrument, as a tool, as some sort of gesture of support for a country. It isn't. You talk to your enemies as much as you talk to your friends, and I think we lost that. And we continue to lose that. And this, it's directly relevant to the issues here because we get information from our allies, from the Brits, from the Australians, from the New Zealanders, about what's going on there. It's not the same as being there. And our ability to be able to gauge what's going on with the IRGC, internally, what's going on, perhaps even some of the people, some of the businesses. A lot of these guys have their hands all over business in Iran. And to be able to have a sense on the ground what they're all about and what links they may or may not have to Canada. Those are intelligence assets that would greatly support this kind of legislation, this kind of listing. We don't have it. We rely on our allies, which we always did and we always would in any case, but we lost our own particular perspective. And that's challenging for us in listing the IRGC. That's challenging for us in knowing what's going on with Iran. It's challenging for us in being able to have a dialogue with our Five Eyes partners in particular, and also with Israel, about what's going on there, to be able to sort of shape their perspectives. We've lost all that, and for basically a gesture.
And I remember the Ben Affleck film when Canada was very involved in '79 in helping our ally America. I know it's not factually accurate, but still, for pop culture. In terms of the successes or challenges we've had with Canada and our allies in confronting the IRGC up to date, do you want to opine a bit on that in the next 40 seconds?
Really have a whole lot not to add, really. We've never really, at least when I was there, we didn't really face pressure on that. We all talked about it. Everybody was agreed on the Quds Force, but in terms of the IRGC, everybody understood the challenges. And one challenge, and I think that also needs to be in answer to an earlier question as well, it's this differentiation. I mean, there are a lot of people that get caught up in the IRGC, and Professor Hampson has mentioned it as well. They're basically doing their time, and they build connections. It's a way to get ahead. It's not exactly analogous to the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, but some of that is there is an analogy in some respects. So being able to differentiate them, and some of them are probably living in Canada, they did their time, they served, they had nothing to do with anything bad. And are we going to want to differentiate, or are we going to catch everybody in the same web? I don't know, but that's one of the challenges of dealing with the legislation as well.
Thank you. We now turn to MP Bergeron. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to our witnesses for being with us this evening to inform our consideration of these very important matters. I'd like to ask you the very same questions I asked the previous panelists. A number of witnesses testified to us about the threat that the IRGC represents not only internationally, but also for national security. And they were urging us to list that organization as a terrorist entity in Canada. But we had some iconoclastic testimony from an Ottawa University professor last week, and he said that even though this was the thing to do, it wasn't the time to do it, because given the conflict in the Middle East, this would, in fact, cause Canada to lose a lot of credibility in the global south. What do you think of that statement? Perhaps we could begin with Mr. Hampson.
Thank you very much for your question, which has 2 parts. What are they up to in Canada? As I said earlier, I've provided quite a few links in my testimony that the clerk will make available to the committee members of well-documented cases of money laundering, influence peddling, business associations, that those who, if they're not IRGC members, who have ties with the IRGC have been involved in Canada. And, I would add parenthetically, that's one of the reasons why we suspended diplomatic relations with Iran, was because their embassy was not doing the sorts of things embassies normally do, but there was a lot of spying and other kinds of subterfuge taking place in Canada that was certainly making Iranian students and others very uncomfortable. In terms of timing, I would make a different argument. Iran is the major supporter of Hezbollah. It's the major supporter of Hamas. It is the major supporter of the Houthis in Yemen. It has launched major attacks directly against Israel. And it's not business as usual in the Middle East. And it's not business as usual in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think we all know that. And we are entering a very dangerous era. One only has to go to our Global Affairs website, which is pointing out that Canadians traveling not just in the Middle East, but in France, in Spain, in other countries of Europe, have to be on the lookout for potential terrorist activities and threats that may put them at risk. Well, why is that? It's because of the conflict that has taken a terrible turn in the Middle East. And I would submit that one of the reasons why Canada should designate the IRGC terrorist actor is to close the circle Is it a perfect fix? No. Is it a difficult call? Yes, I would agree with everything Mr. Horak said. It's a tough call. But on balance, given the world we're in now, given the fact that this is one way to prevent those with ties to the IRGC from coming into Canada, there may be sleeper cells here. I don't know. But when you're faced with the kinds of risks that are real, then this kind of action, yes, it's symbolically important, but it also says to the government, to officials in government, that we got to take this threat seriously.
Yeah, very quickly, just in terms of the Iranian embassy not being here, yes, they were up to some pretty nefarious activities, but them having a presence here, I think, helped us be able to see those and be able to monitor those and track those in a way that we can't now. On the question of the reaction, if we were to act now, I agree completely with what the professor said. One thing, though, and maybe this is what was meant, I don't know, that it would be presented and perhaps perceived in other countries in the world as we're doing this to benefit Israel. And if that's the problem, well, then too bad. I don't think international reaction should be a deterrent to us doing it. The Iranians will be ticked off, but so what?
MP McPherson, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you both of you for your testimony today. It's been very interesting. I'm struggling with something, though. I think I'm kind of hearing a bit of a mixed message that it is a symbolic gesture to list the IRGC, and that we can't enforce it, but that it is an important gesture and it will have an impact. So you can see how I'm struggling a little bit with that. Is it symbolic and you know, if we are not able to enforce it adequately? You know, you spoke, Dr. Hampson, about not letting the tail wag the dog. But if we don't have those resources, if there is no transparency on where that $76 million is going, if we have no ability to measure whether or not the impact of listing this is if there is an impact, it does seem slightly performative, and I do worry that even that symbolism is not in, as you put it, in the balance, going to be as effective as some of the other measures. Like that we actually have to fix some of those things before we take this step. But I understand what you're saying, that this moment in time requires this action. I'm just, in my mind, I'm really struggling. The other thing, Dr. Hampson, you said is that 80% of those are choosing to be part of the IRGC, of those that we would be worried about, you know, catching in this web. But surely you don't mean that 20% of people that didn't choose are it's okay that we catch those too, you know, that they're collateral damage, I guess you could say. Like, sure, can you explain what you meant by that? I'm a little.
So in the context of, you know, would this just be a symbolic act? It depends how you frame it, and I would suggest that it shouldn't. It should include reporting requirements. How is the money being used? What is the bureaucracy doing to up its game? How are they tightening the net? Now, some of that may be difficult to do in open committee, but there are other ways of getting that information, or at least introducing some accountability in terms of how additional resources which have been put to deal with this issue. It also, I think, makes it clear that this should be a priority for our intelligence services. Your second question about the conscripts, the argument that some made, and it was based, I think, largely on a somewhat dated CIA report that many, if not the majority, of the members of the IRGC were conscripts, unwitting conscripts. More recent evidence suggests that is not the case. Those who join it do so. The indoctrination element is hugely important. So you may be an unwitting conscript, but once you've gone through the indoctrination program, you're a threat, particularly if you're an IRGC operative. So that would be my point there. It's not just people sitting at desks, passing religious notes across the table, right? I mean, this is an organization that does have operatives, and not all of them are here. I mean, a lot of what the IRGC does is to maintain internal order and control in Iran.
Well, my understanding, though, as well, is that there are members of the IRGC that could be cooks or could, that are not implicated on that. But perhaps I think Mr. Horak, you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, and that is right. I mean, as with any organization, there's pencil pushers who are far removed from a lot of the excesses. And I think it's this whole question of conscripts and whether they're involuntarily conscripted into the IRGC. Again, the numbers, as you were saying, the numbers I think are a bit off. Being a member of the IRGC has some prestige in certain circles in Iran. It has some benefits in terms of developing networks. There are former IRGC officials and members that are, as I was saying earlier, all over the Iranian economy. When I was there, if there was a big deal, whether it was telecommunications companies or whatever, you could bet there was an IRGC, often a former IRGC person behind it. So it can be a ticket to, you can think of it as a fraternity almost, like an American fraternity that, you develop, a terrible fraternity. I don't know what Greek letter it would be, but there are networks, there are advantages to having been in the IRGC. Quite apart, and you're right, there is an indoctrination process as well, and you get a lot of people that would be ideologically committed to this, but there are a lot of them that are wanting to be in the IRGC for the material benefits it can provide to them going down the road too. So now, whether we excuse them for that is a whole other question, but there are different elements within the organization, and of course, the worst of the worst go into the Quds Force.
Thank you. We next go to MP Hoback. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I guess just leading into that, we do have prosecutor discretion here in Canada. So if we are to list them, there's a process they have to go through. It's not like they automatically get thrown in jail. They can go through the process and actually have it determined at that point in time whether they actually were in a situation where they didn't really want to be part of it, but were part of it and did nothing wrong or did no harm. And then there's a process where we can identify that say this guy's a bad actor, and thus is treated accordingly. Is that not fair to say?
Yeah, but it's about even some of them getting here. And there are instruments already that do these sorts of things. I mean, if I remember right, the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, for example, has been used against other countries. If I remember right, after some people call it the coup in Egypt that removed the Muslim Brotherhood, for a time, using the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, we weren't allowing anybody who had done any military service in Egypt to come to Canada. Why that can't be applied to, and the Egyptian military wasn't a designated terrorist organization, why that can't be applied to IRGC members applying to come to Canada, I don't know. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a lawyer. But you're right, in terms of activities that are done here, there's a judicial process, and that could happen with or without them being, if we find they're up to some nefarious activities here, be it money laundering or support for terrorism organizations or whatever it might be. There are deportation measures that could be taken against them, whether we listed our organization on, or if they committed and broken any laws, they can be arrested and charged. So again, I'm not sure what this adds, but the symbolic value, coming to what was said earlier, there is value in that.
But it does add something, because when you do list them, now anybody who is raising money for them would actually qualify or be recognized or identified under that scenario, correct?
Yeah, no, true. That's
so
true.
I look at the toolbox and say, okay, we add a box or another tool to the toolbox. But you made a good point. We've got a toolbox with some tools on it that haven't been used. And can you explain to me why in the bureaucracy they haven't utilized all the tools they already have? If they sense that we're looking at adding more tools to the toolbox, why wouldn't they be more aggressive with the tools they have to actually address the issues?
I had an answer for you. I didn't understand it at the time where they were applying it to the Egyptian military, and I never got a straight answer from Immigration Canada or whatever they were called at the time. So I honestly don't know.
Mr. Hempson, would you have any theories on that?
We've already heard about the coordination problems among our security services. And so perhaps one way of addressing that is to say, here's some threats you got to really take seriously because Parliament has said, yeah, the system is not working the way it should. You said it. And we should probably we should also probably not use the cook example because the innocent cook example, because I would like to point out that Putin's cook was somebody called Prigozhin. So,
good point.
They only start off as cooks.
Yeah.
They can start off as a cook and have greater ambitions.
MP Algabra, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Horak, I want to direct my question to you. You've eloquently outlined the complexity of listing the IRGC. So maybe I'll take a pragmatic question to you. Assuming the government would do that, what kind of advice, what kind of safeguards do we need to associate if the government is going to proceed in that direction? What measures or what safeguards do we need to include as we move forward with this?
I think we need to take a step back and say, are we willing to accept that we are going to catch everybody with this net? And if we're fine with that, then we're fine with that. And if we're not, we have to figure out a way legally, and I don't know how to do it, but legally a way to differentiate. Okay, is there a way to track her? This person did X activities. But as a gentleman was saying, you could list the organization, and if somebody's fundraising for them, say, okay, that's illegal. But in terms of the individuals that are here or the individuals who want to come to Canada, do we want to say, okay, here's a full ban? Nobody, IRGC background can't come in. Or do we want to differentiate? I don't think we have the resources for that. I frankly don't even know we have the resources to figure out whether these guys are IRGC or not. To determine, they fill out an immigration form. They don't have, if they don't put down the IRGC membership or background, say they were working with the Iranian Navy during their military service. I don't think we have the capability to say they're lying.
And these are the challenges. Professor Hampson, just a few days ago, I was speaking with a constituent who is a Canadian citizen, unable to travel to the U.S. because he was conscripted to the IRGC. So is there any advice that you have for the government if it were to proceed in that direction? What type of safeguards can or need to be included in this measure?
40 seconds.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and there are members of this committee who are lawyers, and some of those safeguards were alluded to earlier. The question always is, do you want to err in the direction of greater security, or do you want to err in the direction of less security and shall we say, greater respect for individual cases like the one you mentioned? And there is no perfect answer to that. And as I tried to suggest earlier, we are now in an environment where we have to start taking security seriously. and this is one of those cases. Is it a perfect solution? No. But will it raise the bar? Yes, for many of the reasons that I mentioned.
Thank you. We now go to MP Bergeron, a minute and a half.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. In Political Option 2012, Mr. Hampson, you say that the Obama administration had to be firm vis-à-vis Iran and draw a red line, and compared it with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which had been resolved with deployment of a tremendous diplomatic efforts. The nuclear threat from Iran is continuing 12 years later, even with sanctions. To your mind, why is this happening, and what should we be doing to try to change the trend, if it's even possible to do so?
Well, when the Iranian nuclear agreement was negotiated by Iran, I think, and the United States and the other 6 parties, I think there was a lot of hope that it would, wasn't a perfect solution, but it would slow down Iran's nuclear ambitions. I was a supporter of those agreements. But then there was a change in administration, and the United States essentially tore the whole thing up. And that was probably a mistake. But we can't revisit history. And I think now, given the regional security tensions, that Iran is not going to dial back on its nuclear ambitions. And the realist in me says it's only a matter of time. And in the current environment, it's probably going to accelerate, unless there is a change of regime in Iran, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. There are a lot of Iranians, as we all know, who are extremely unhappy with the regime. And I think it is important to support them. I think it's important to support the diaspora communities here that are strong voices for human rights. We can do that in a more systematic way. The project that I referred to.
In your
My
response, I apologize. For the last question, we go to MP McPherson. You have a minute and a half.
I think what I'll do with my minute and a half is ask you, Mr. Horak, a question that I asked one of our witnesses earlier in the week with regards to the Houthis. You know, we know that the people of Yemen have suffered greatly over the past decade, first with the war with the Saudi-led coalition that Canada supported politically, which, of course, led to a terrible humanitarian crisis, and now under the Houthis, who are brutal to civilians, there doesn't seem to be much hope of any change anytime soon. What actions can Canada take that would help people in Yemen who have already suffered so much?
We could do whatever we can to support the Saudi-Yemeni peace talks. That's the start, to try and solidify those, offer them whatever support we can. But it's tough. The Houthi are very unpleasant. They're feeling emboldened now. Their willingness to make any sort of compromises with the Saudis is going to be lessened. So I think, as we always do, I think to make ourselves available if you need something, if you need, I don't know, whether patrol boats or whatever it might be in the international community, to support the international efforts to try and protect the shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Mawdad. Those are the sorts of things we can do. But it's very tough at this moment because of the situation, because with the Houthis and how they're feeling that this is, they're on the march and they're not being rolled back.
Thank you very much. That concludes Our questions. Professor Hampson, Mr. Horak, thank you very, very much for your generous commitment of time and for your expertise. Meeting stands adjourned.